Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Now, I did have a little conversation with myself before this episode started saying, Ruth, you don't need to talk about the weather. And that's partly because I talk about the weather every single week at the beginning. And I'm fairly sure that if I open my mouth, it will just come out anyway. So I think we can just take it as read that it's doing something very British outside at the moment, and we'll just move on and get on with today's episode. And what I do actually want to start with is a message, or at least a type of message that I get a version of most weeks. And it goes something like this. I really want to lose weight. I know roughly what I should be eating, but I just can't face tracking every single calorie again. I tried, I lasted about 3 days, got fed up and stopped. And now I feel like I failed before I even properly started. And this I do understand, because I think part of it is that if you're anywhere near my age, which by the way, is going to be 44 next week, but there's a decent chance that you've been doing some version of this since you were maybe later teens, slimming clubs, points, sins, shakes, tracking apps. It can be decades of it. So when the answer to losing a bit of weight turns out to be, oh, just start tracking your calories again or tracking everything again, something inside you very reasonably goes, no, not that, not again. I just haven't got it in me. And I don't think this is a laziness thing. I think that you're a person who's tired and who has earned the right to do it in an easier way. And if this is landing a little close to home at the moment, then you are in the right place, because today's episode I have called How to Lose Weight Without Tracking Your Calories, because you can. You really can. Now, I did touch on this a little bit when I was looking to lose a little bit of weight that I gained over the winter, and I was approaching that without logging any calories as well. So I do want to today talk about it properly, because there is a lot involved. But the thing that I notice is that so many of us are stuck between two options, and that both of these options can feel pretty rubbish. So option one is you track everything. You weigh the porridge, log that splash of milk in your tea, hover over the app in the restaurant trying to guess how much oil is in that sauce. And then option two is just give up entirely and sort of hope for the best. Eat intuitively. And actually, I should probably say intuitively in inverted commas, because in practice, this often means that we eat whatever is going and we feel vaguely anxious about it. So what I want to offer you today is this sweet spot that sits in between the middle. And I think it's actually where most people who keep weight off for good tend to live. And I want to present this in the way that I think about it. So if you imagine me cooking a bolognese, a meal that I have cooked again and again for years, I'm not weighing anything. There's no recipe propped open, no phone open with the recipe on it, no scales out on the counter. I'm just adding in that glove of oil, a good handful of this and a handful of that, browning it off, seasoning it until it tastes about right. And it's more or less the same every week. And that's because I understand that dish. I've made it enough times that I just know now. Now I want you to picture someone else making exactly the same recipe or meal for the very first time. They've got the recipe open on their phone. They're leveling off any tablespoons. They're weighing out the pasta. They're checking they've not skipped a step. And there is nothing wrong with that. This is understandable. It's how we learn the dish. But nobody is expecting you to cook with the scales out forever. The whole point of following the recipe properly a few times is that eventually you won't need it. And tracking your calories is the recipe. Understanding your calories is being the person who just knows now. They're not the same skill. And I think this is the bit that can often get muddled. You can stop weighing the pasta and still have a perfectly good sense of how much pasta you need. The recipe was never the goal. Knowing your way around the kitchen was. And that, for me, is basically the whole episode in one go. It's not the anti-calorie episode. It's not the anti-tracking episode, because calorie balance really does still matter. It always has. And I'm not going to sit here trying to tell you any different. What I am going to say, or what I am going to do, is separate two things that often get muddled together. And that's understanding calories and tracking calories. It sounds like the same thing, but it really isn't. So I want to start with why tracking is so hard for so many of you. Because if you're somebody that's bounced off it before, there's a chance that you've told yourself that you're the problem. And I don't think you are. The first reason we can struggle is perfectionism. And it's a big one. The whole appeal of a number is that it is exact. which is lovely right up until the moment that you can't be exact. And then that exactness turns on you. You don't know the weight of the curry, so the day feels ruined. You stop logging because you can't log everything. So you stop caring, and then you feel like you're off plan by Tuesday. The precision that was meant to help you then becomes the thing that tips you over the edge. It's part of why when there is a number, I'd always make it a range. It's why we use calorie ranges when you sign up for Ruth McFit. It gives you somewhere to land rather than one exact number to hit. You can then look at your average over the course of the week, and it stops that pass or fail thinking. Then there's the maths. Every meal becomes this little sum. You're stood in the kitchen at 6:30 trying to feed 3 other people, and you're also mentally adding up the calories in the stir fry. And that can feel relentless. For a week or two, you can manage it. But life is long, and most of us don't have that spare mental space to run a calculator over everything we eat forever. But it's like that thing that's been going around on social media. It's like, you want to look at my search history? Yeah, fine. Just don't look at my calculator history. We'll often put in things that we can easily do, but when we're feeling mentally overloaded or we're lacking that mental space, we don't want to have to work out the small things. And I think it's that word space that is important here. You will have heard me bang on about mental load, cognitive load before, so I'm not going to labor the point here. But tracking is one of those things that sits right on top of an already full brain. We've got the school stuff, the work stuff, the appointment that nobody has booked yet, the parent that you're keeping an eye on. And then tracking is asking for a slice of attention as well that you just might not at the moment have spare to give. We then have the on plan, off plan thing, which is, I think, arguably the most damaging of them all. Tracking can quietly train you to see every day as either success or failure. You logged, great, well done, good girl, pat on the back. You didn't, well, write the day off then. There is no in between. We know that the all or nothing thinking is one of the biggest things that keeps women stuck. So the last thing we want is a tool that is going to feed this. There's also the way it can make food feel like surveillance, that every meal is logged, every bite accounted for, this low hum of being watched, even though the only one watching is you. And this is something that I used to struggle with tracking. I could even be given a reasonably sensible number of calories and it would still feel restrictive. It can then make eating out feel stressful because suddenly you're trying to reverse engineer a menu. It can turn a meal at your mum's or a slice of birthday cake into a problem to be solved rather than something you're just enjoying and having and it's happening. And for some people, this can roll off them. It's absolutely fine. It doesn't impact them. And that is great. But for a lot of you, especially if food and guilt have got this long history, it can slowly take the pleasure out. It's a way of eating that becomes joyless and has a shelf life. And I know something that I used to do when I tracked more was if I wanted something else because I was feeling particularly hungry, I'd look at the calories I'd eaten during the day and be like, well, maybe that banana wasn't actually a large banana. Maybe it was actually a small banana. I can claw back a few calories then. And that's where things like a range happen because our hunger isn't going to be the same every single day. There's no exact number that we need to hit. But the thing that I really do want you to hear right now is that a strategy only works if you can actually do it. I know this sounds obvious when I'm saying it out loud, but I think we forget constantly. So we go hunting for these best methods, the optimal method, when the question that really actually matters is, can I still see myself doing this when life is super busy, harder, messier, more social? Because the research is very clear here. The single strongest predictor of whether someone loses weight and keeps it off isn't the diet that they choose, it's whether they can stick to it. Consistency is going to beat clever every time. So if tracking is a thing that you can be consistent with and you find it useful and great, then brilliant, please do continue. And we're going to come back to this. But if it's a thing that has you giving up by Thursday, this is not a character flaw. This is useful information and we need to work around that too. Now, I do want to be a bit careful here because there's a place this conversation can go that I really don't want it to go. Not tracking your calories and calories not mattering are two completely different things. But I do see them get tangled up all the time. And this is often by wellness accounts that are telling you that it's all about cortisol or seed oils or eating for your hormones. And I don't want you walking away from this episode thinking that calories don't matter or that they're made up. because I'm not saying that, and I won't say that, because fat loss still requires a calorie deficit, taking in a bit less energy than you're using across time. This is the mechanism and it hasn't changed. And no amount of me being relaxed about tracking changes the underlying maths. What I do want you to sit with is this. Tracking doesn't cause fat loss. A deficit causes fat loss. Tracking is just one way of noticing whether you're in one. It's a torch, not the thing it's shining on. So when you stop tracking, you're not switching the deficit off. You're just choosing a different way to find your way around the room. And I'm going to use my own example. I don't track my calories day to day. I haven't for a long time, but if you ask me, I could give you a rough answer of all of it. I could tell you roughly where my maintenance sits, the amount where my weight just holds steady and doesn't really move. I could tell you roughly what I'd bring that down to if I wanted to lose a bit of weight, which isn't some massive cut, by the way, just a notch lower than where I am. I know which of my meals are the heavier ones and which are the lighter ones without having to weigh every single thing. And this isn't living inside a tracking app. It is inside my head because at some point I learnt that. But if we wanted to make this a bit less vague, let's take my breakfast. I have pretty much the same thing most mornings. It does change season to season. At the moment, it's still overnight oats. It's one of the recipes from the app. And because I've seen it written down before, I happen to know that it's around 450 calories. It's about 28 grams of protein and around 12 grams of fiber. But I'm not logging that anywhere. I just know it. My usual lunch is the same story. It's a planned thing that I've had many times before, and I will have tracked it at some point. So I know where it fits, and it's going to be somewhere around 450 to 500 calories. So again, without opening a single app, I can do a quick sum in my head. Breakfast and lunch equals this, and then I've got an idea of what I have left to play with for the rest of the day. Now, before you think that I've turned this back into maths, this isn't the relentless every meal sum I was talking about earlier. It's two numbers I already know off by heart, and they're totted up in a couple of seconds in my head. And I think this is the part that we often miss. Awareness and logging are two different things. Logging is writing it down. Awareness is the bit that we know. You can then choose to stop writing things down, but you don't lose the knowing. And you can definitely build this up yourself, by the way. You do not need to track forever to get there. You pin down your 2 or 3 regular breakfasts and lunches once, get a rough idea of what they come to, and then you carry on with those. And then you're carrying those numbers around with you for good. No app required. But I don't want to pretend that I do that little sum every single day with every meal. I don't. Some days I've not got the headspace for even that. And that's where everything else carries me forward. The go-to meals, the protein, the fiber, the not picking at things. They hold the line when I'm not paying attention. And before we do go any further, I will just highlight the shape of things so you know roughly where we're heading. I briefly mentioned it then, because if you do decide not to track, we don't want you left there standing with nothing. We want you instead to move your attention onto a small handful of things that are going to do the same job in the background, the things that will help you stay in a deficit, eating actual meals instead of grazing your way throughout the day, getting in enough protein, getting enough fiber, then keeping a bit of awareness about what you're eating rather than feeling like you need to log it all. That is the general shape of things. But I am going to look at those individually in a moment. I just wanted you to have this sort of map in your head to know that meals, protein, fiber, awareness, and this is where your attention can go. And then we'll go through it one at a time shortly. But before we do that, I do want to be very fair about something, because I'd hate this to come across as an episode that says that tracking is bad and no tracking is good, because that's just all or nothing thinking, wearing a different coat, isn't it? Tracking is not the enemy. And for a lot of people, it really is one of the most useful things that they'll ever do. And the reason is that it's going to teach you things that you can't learn any other way. I do think that if you've never tried it before, it is worth doing for a short period of time. It teaches you portions for a start. Most of us have no real idea of what a portion of pasta or rice or cereal actually is until we've weighed it out a few times. And I think your answer can often be a shock. I know my husband felt like this when he was weighing out a cereal just to see, and he'd been getting, well, probably thinking that 2 or 3 times that was a portion for him, which it can be. But again, it comes down to awareness. It also teaches you where your protein is really coming from, and that can often be a lot less of it than you think. It teaches you about fiber, which most of us are nowhere near getting enough of. It teaches you as well where your calories are coming from, which is very often never the place that you'd have guessed. And the big one here is that we are pretty terrible at estimating how much we eat. And I've mentioned this research in last week's episode, but the research on this isn't about us lying to ourselves. It's just that our brain rounds down. So the handful we have here, the bit of the kid's plate, the second helping that didn't quite feel like a second helping, tracking, even for a short spell, can drag all of that into the light. And people are routinely stunned by what a fortnight of honest logging can show them. It's creating that awareness and that pause. And the portion thing alone is worth the price of admission, because the first time you actually weigh out what you thought was a normal bowl of granola and then discover it's 2 or 3 times the size of what it says in the box, it can be a bit depressing, but it's also useful and it can reframe things a fair bit. It's not in a way to make you feel guilty. It's in well, that explains a few things. And then you can't really unknow that once you've seen it. And that is quite valuable. So I'm not anti it at all. The research on dietary self-monitoring, which are the studies that follow people who actually log their food, they consistently link it with better weight loss outcomes. So it does work. But the shift I want you to make is this. Tracking can be a phase. It doesn't need to be this long sentence. It's something you do for a while to learn what you need to learn, and then you can let it go. So if you fancy a few weeks of tracking to learn your numbers, go for it with my blessing. Just know what it's for and know that you're allowed to stop. Right, this is the heart of the episode now. This is the bit that's saying, if we're not counting the numbers, what are we doing instead? And we're going to be doing those things that shape how much we eat without us having to log every single thing. Because what tracking is really doing is nudging us towards eating a bit less. And it can also help with us getting a bit more protein. So we just go straight to the behaviors that are going to do the same job. And I'm going to walk you through those now. The first one, and the one that does a lot of the heavy lifting, is to build actual meals. For most people, that can be thinking about 3 meals a day. And that's a great starting point. I know this won't be the same for everyone. Some of you do better with 2. Some of you really do need something mid-afternoon that's a bit bigger, and that's fine too. It's not a rule. It's just a default to start from. And the reason it works is because a structured meal does a job for you. When you sit down to something with some protein in it, some fibre in it, on a plate, you tend to feel properly fed. It can leave you feeling satiated and full. And when you feel full, the picking falls away on its own. And if you compare that to a day where you skip breakfast, have a vague lunch, graze throughout the afternoon, then arrive at the evening absolutely ravenous, you're the same person, but there's a wildly different intake happening. And the difference wasn't willpower, it was the structure. The meals were never built, so the eating never really stopped. And this doesn't need to be this big elaborate plan. I think we can feel like that too. A meal can be a couple of eggs and a bagel, or last night's chicken thrown over a bag of salad with something nice on the top. I'm not asking you to plate up like a restaurant and to plan different meals every single day. We're asking for something with a bit of protein, something with a bit of fibre, sat on a plate, eaten sitting down, and that's a meal. The thing that we're actually trying to move away from is the day that's a long series of bites, that constant grazing that never really leaves us feeling satiated and full. Now, I am going to talk about protein and fibre now, but I don't want you thinking that I'm falling for some kind of trend, because you see this a lot on social media at the moment. They're not magic foods. They're not clever hacks. There's nothing particularly special going on. The reason that I'll bang on about them all the time is because when you're consistently getting enough of both, a whole load of other stuff that you'd otherwise have to think about just quietly sorts itself out on its own. So they're really worth paying a bit of attention to, but it's not because they're trendy. It's because it makes everything else easier. So inside the meals that you're building, the first thing that I think you should look at is including protein in those, because it earns its keep in 2 different ways. The first is fullness. You see, protein is the most filling of the lot, and by a decent margin as well. It's the nutrient that actually tells your body, right, that'll do, I can stop now. So when you build your meals around it, you end up eating less across the day without having to white knuckle your way through anything, which is exactly what we're after. The deficit then gets easier instead of harder. I'm all for minimum effort, maximum reward. And the second reason it matters, which matters more as we get older, is when you lose weight, you don't only want to lose body fat, you also want to hang on to that muscle. Muscle is the thing that's keeping you strong and capable through your 40s, your 50s, your 60s and beyond. Eating enough protein, especially alongside a bit of strength work, is how we protect it while the fat comes off. Skimp on it and you can end up smaller, but softer and weaker, which I don't think is anybody's goal. A rough target that works for most women is somewhere in the region of 25 to 35 grams a meal. You don't need to weigh it to the gram, but think a palm-sized piece of chicken or fish, a few eggs, 0% Greek yogurt, maybe a decent scoop of something into your porridge, but get a proper source of protein onto the plate at each meal, and you're most of the way there already. Breakfast is often where this falls down. You wake up, you have a piece of toast or some cereal, just a bit of fruit, and you've had next to no protein before lunchtime, which is a big reason why you're rummaging through the snack cupboards by 11 a.m. So if you only change one meal, change this one first, breakfast, get some protein in there. That might be a couple of eggs and a bagel, some Greek yogurt, but front load it a bit and the rest of the day then tends to feel much easier. And then sitting next to protein, we have fibre, which I would argue is one of the most underrated thing on your plate. Fibre is going to fill you up, but it does it differently. It tends to come bundled up in food that's higher in volume and low in calories. Here we can think veg, fruit, beans, pulses, and whole grains, food that is going to take up room in your stomach. Your stomach is, in the nicest possible way, a little bit thick. It largely responds to how full it physically feels. So a big, colourful plate of food that happens to be low in calories will satisfy you far more than a small calorie-dense one. And fibre is how you're going to get proper amount of food and still sit comfortably inside a deficit. It's also just good for you in a normal, unglamorous sort of way. It's going to keep your digestion moving. It feeds your good bacteria in your gut. It helps with all sorts of things. And most of us are sitting well short of what we're aiming for here, which is around 25 to 35 grams a day. And that can be a target that if you're not there yet, you can work towards. And you get there by adding and not restricting, which I love. I think that when we add more of these things, without even thinking about it, we're taking less of the others. So you'll be thinking about adding more veg onto your plate, chucking some beans into what you're cooking. It's one of the easiest wins going, I think. But a rule of thumb, if targets do help you, is to aim for around 10 grams of fibre per meal. 3 meals and you're there. But it can be trickier than it sounds, especially in the evening. But it can be easier because when our protein's already sorted, say your dinner is high in protein, but it's a little bit light on fibre, you don't have to force these ingredients like veg onto a plate where it really doesn't belong. You can just lean on a bit of fruit afterwards instead. So a pear on its own with the skin on is around 6 grams of fibre. So a piece of fruit for pudding or as a snack can top you up without having to meddle with the meal itself. In practice, this is far less complicated than it often sounds. You can have berries on your 0% Greek yogurt. You can leave the skins on potatoes. You can have whole wheat pasta instead of normal pasta. You can have a tin of something stirred into your bolognese, which don't do if it tastes bad, right? You might decide to add lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans into a recipe where they will add to it and bulk the whole thing out. You're not trying to overhaul your diet. You're just nudging it a bit more towards having some plant-based ingredients in it, a bit more rough stuff onto the plates you're eating anyway. But like I said, you don't need to force it where it doesn't belong because there are other ways of getting it as well. Right, next one. And this is the one people resist, I think, maybe the hardest, and that's repeat your meals. There is a belief that eating well means cooking something different and interesting every single night. And I don't know about you, but I do not have time for that. I do love new recipes, but I think the people who find this all easy, the ones who just it sort of works for, almost all repeat their meals far more than they'd care to admit. And I am one of those. I'll have the same breakfast, as I mentioned, for weeks at a stretch without getting bored of it. All through the winter, my lunch was the Thai curry soup from the app over and over and over. Now it's summer and I've swung to having the protein prepped and then having that on salad. My meals do change with the seasons, but at any given point, there's this rotation running that I'm not really even thinking about. I don't even notice the point where it's changing seasonally. It just kind of happens. But the reason it works is going to be decision fatigue. Every meal you have to invent from scratch is another decision that our brain does not have that space for. We have only got so many decisions before the brain starts reaching for whatever is quickest and beigest. When breakfast and lunch are just what they are, you stop spending energy on them and the whole thing gets just easier. You don't need this fresh masterpiece every single day. You just need a few good defaults that you don't have to think about. You might have heard people talk about variety and saying that you need to be getting 30 different plants a week. And you might be worried about repeating the same meals for this reason. And it's true that our gut does like a bit of variety, but I don't want that to put you off repeating your meals, because what counts as a different plant is much broader than people actually assume. A Cox apple is one and a Braeburn apple is another. They're two different varieties. Herbs, spices, nuts, and seeds all go on the tally as well. So you really can run up a samey rotation and still clock up enough plants without really even trying. So variety and repetition aren't actually at odds with each other at all. Now, if we're thinking about where weight can quietly hide, I think this is next one is quite important. Almost nobody is tracking it, even when they think they are, because most people don't actually overeat their meals. They overeat in between them. It's the picking and the nibbling, the corner off the kids' toast, the soggy toast that we don't even want, handful of crisps when you're cooking because you're just really hungry, then a few more while you're plating up, the cheese that you have when the fridge is open that you've completely forgotten about by the time you actually sit down. None of this actually feels like eating. None of it gets logged because none of it happened at a table. But of course it does all count and it all adds up, and it can add up quickly. And I'm not telling you to never have a snack. That would be miserable, wouldn't it? I'm telling you to notice. And so much of this eating happens on autopilot. It's like hand has gone into the mouth before the brain's even got involved. So the single most useful thing we can do is slip in a tiny pause, which might sound easier said than done, but it can be even just a second before you're picking up. Am I actually hungry? Or is this just because I'm here? You're just turning the lights on in a room where you've been eating with your eyes closed. It might be that you choose to eat it anyway, and that is completely fine, but you all have chosen it. The automatic stuff is when we're in that reaction mode, that's where things start to really slip. It goes back to why I always say meals before snacks. And I say that because, like most people, if I'm really, really hungry and I haven't eaten my lunch yet or my dinner yet, you can just want something super quickly to have now. But I'll say to myself, eat whatever it is I'm going to eat as my meal first. And if I still want it, I can have it afterwards. And it's just like, have the meal first, Ruth, because you rarely feel bad about choosing the healthier planned option. And the evenings are where it can all fall apart, of course. The kids are finally down or the day's finally done. You may have not really stopped all day, and then you find yourself going back and forth to the kitchen in this constant loop, having a bit of this, a bit of that. And again, nothing really counts as a meal, but you're still grazing at 9 o'clock. And it's not because you're greedy or that you lack any sort of willpower. You're a tired person who's looking for a bit of a reward at the end of a long day, which is a very human reaction. It's just knowing that that's what it actually is. And this is assuming you've had those meals and you've eaten enough during the day. But knowing what it is helps, because then you can give yourself that thing on purpose, the thing that you actually really fancy. And you can sit down and properly enjoy it instead of inhaling half a cupboard's worth of odds and ends without even really tasting them. It's the no crap cake condition. Think less often, more enjoyable. Rather than just picking at all those things that might equate to 400 calories, why don't you sit down and have the thing you really want instead? We also want to think about how we manage our environment, which is the last bit in this sort of section. And this will help us rely on good decisions less. We massively overestimate willpower, and willpower is the first thing to go when we're tired, which for most of us is going to be most evenings. So instead of trying to be strong, set things up so you don't have to be. It isn't very glamorous, but it's the stuff that is going to really help. We can think about this as what's visible. The bowl of fruit on the side gets eaten. The biscuits in the cupboard get forgotten until 10 o'clock when suddenly they don't. So put the thing that you want more of where you can see it, and the thing that you want less of somewhere that is going to take a bit more effort to reach. There is this idea that the 20-second rule, if it's more than 20 seconds away, we've got that time to put in that pause, because it's about convenience. We eat what's easy. So make the better options the easy one. The veg that's already chopped or a bag of frozen veg so that we can easily add that to our meals. One of the most underrated things going, I think. No prep, no waste, and just ready in a couple of minutes. But it might also be the protein that's already been cooked and in the fridge, a bit of overnight oats sat ready for breakfast in the morning. These are decisions that we already made the night before, a couple of days before, instead of the one that you're making when you're tired. And then there's having a rough plan. Just this loose sense of what the meals are before you're stood starving in front of an open fridge. None of this is about restriction. It's building these defaults so that the easy choice and the choice that will have you feeling better become the same choice. You do that once in that calmer moment, and it's going to pay you back again and again, every single day, without you having to think about it. It's doing one thing to make the next day easier. Now, the obvious worry with all of this is, if I'm not tracking anything, how on earth am I going to know if this is working? And that is fair, because you still do want some sort of feedback. It's just you're going to swap one set of feedback, the tracking, for a slightly wider and nicer set. And I think that some of these are going to tell you far more than a calorie app ever did. One of those is going to be the scale, but used properly, which means looking at a trend over weeks, not this morning's number against yesterday's. Your weight is going to fluctuate and bounce around daily for loads of different reasons that have nothing to do with the amount of fat that you're holding. Your salt, your hormones, where you are in your cycle, if you've still got one, whether you slept well. One day means almost nothing. The direction over months means far more. So if you can zoom out and then squint, the scale can be very useful. If a single morning can ruin your day, then just leave it alone for a while and use other forms of measurement. And then there's all the things that the scale can't see, which is a lot. So we can think about how our clothes are fitting, which I think is a really good one to focus on. A tape measure around the waist now and again can also be a good measure. You could do that monthly, perhaps, maybe a photo monthly, because we are not very good at noticing changes on ourselves day to day or week to week. So a comparison shot can show you what the mirror's been hiding. I know it's not easy at the beginning, but it is something that can be useful over time. And then we have the other ones that, although not so obvious, really do matter. Things like your energy, your hunger, your mood, how it feels going up the stairs, whether you're sleeping okay. You're looking to build a fuller picture of progress than that one single number would ever give you. And the last two I mentioned, hunger and energy, are things that I pay very close attention to, because they aren't just signs of whether it's working. They're how you can direct where you're going. If you're ravenous all the time, snapping at everyone, dragging yourself through day to day, that isn't you being virtuous. That's a signal that perhaps you've cut a bit too hard and that it's not going to last. Fat loss is meant to feel mostly fine, a bit hungry sometimes, but mostly fine. If it feels like you're white knuckling your way through every single day, then ease off a little bit, and then know that that gentler version is the one that you can still do in a month. And the version that you're still doing in a month is going to be the one that keeps you going and wins overall. Now, there are a few predictable ways that all of this can go wrong, but they're avoidable once you know what they are. And the first one, and the biggest by a long way, is ditching the tracking and ditching all structure at the same time. This is the one that has people declaring the whole approach doesn't work. They stop logging, but they also stop building meals, stop thinking about protein, stop everything, and they're just winging it, then being surprised when it just goes sideways. That's not eating without tracking. That's eating without anything. No guidance, no structure, nothing. The structure has been the bit that was doing the work. So we want to keep the structure, even if we're dropping the spreadsheet. And actually, it might be that you start with just tracking the things that you don't know to begin with. You might be mixing up a bit of tracking, like tracking just the snacks that you're not sure of, or tracking new meals that you haven't eaten before. But the other way that this can go wrong is thinking intuitive eating means eating whatever sounds good in the moment. And it doesn't mean that. True intuitive eating is a skill that can take a while to build. And for the most of us, that in the moment, that reactive voice has been shaped by decades of stress and habit, and by the fact that there's a packet of biscuits in the cupboard. Whatever your gut reaction to food is right now, it didn't come from nowhere. It's something that we have been practicing for years, every time you've reached for something in a reactive state. If you've ever read the book, The Chimp Paradox, it's a bit like what Professor Steve Peters says there, and he calls it the computer, the part of your brain that just runs the programs that it's been handed. It's got no real thinking involved, and a lot of our eating will live there. So the job isn't to suddenly trust some pure inner voice that magically knows what's best. It's to let the calmer, rational part of you, which is the human, run the new way for long enough that it gets written in as a new default. And then we need to trust the process while the programming catches up, while that computer starts to catch up. You see, honoring every craving the second that it arrives isn't intuition. It's just not having a plan. The third thing is living on snacks instead of meals, which really is the first point. But it's so common that I thought I'd mention it again on its own here. But this is where a yogurt here, a cereal bar there, a bit of toast and grazing your way through the day feels light. It can feel almost like you're being really virtuous, like you're barely eating, but you're actually often eating quite a lot, especially in calorie ways, but you've spread it so thin that you can't see it because you don't feel satiated, you don't feel full. So we need to put a reminder here to build the meals first. And fourth is ignoring protein, which we've also covered. But I'm just going to say it again here because it's the first thing that can slip when we're not counting. If you take one number away from today, let it be a rough protein target, because that will help everything else. And the fifth one that I want to mention, and particularly to those of you who are very health conscious, and I spoke about it in a little bit more detail in last week's episode, but it's assuming that because a food is healthy, it can't be contributing to calories. So nuts, granola, nut butter, olive oil, all really good for you, all things that I would eat absolutely, but also things that are extremely easy to take in a lot without even noticing because they're calorie dense. And they've got that health halo around them. So we don't always count them in the same way that we'd count a biscuit. So we take that little handful of nuts, that generous glug of oil over a salad, and that can easily add up to a few hundred calories. And you've put that under healthy and therefore doesn't count. But they do count. Nothing's free. It's just something we want to be aware of. Now, everything I've talked about today, the meals, the protein, the fiber, the noticing, setting your kitchen up so it's on your side, these aren't weight loss tricks that you just do for a bit and stop. And that's important to recognize. They're how we eat now. They're the healthy lifestyle that you're going to be living. And this is the point. The problem with tracking, even when it does work, is that almost nobody wants to do it forever. So the day you stop, you can be left with no idea what you're going to do. And then the weight will quietly find its way back on. Whereas the skills we've talked about today, they don't have to vanish. They don't have a finish line, and health shouldn't have a finish line. These are the habits that when the weight is off, they help you keep it off. You're not going to do one thing to lose it and then a totally different thing to help you maintain it. You're just going to be carrying on. It's going to be maybe a bit more relaxed, eating roughly the way that you've learned to eat, but maintenance stops being this like cliff edge that you can fall off, and it just becomes what you are already doing with a little bit more food across the week, not loads. And I want you to remember that if tracking calories works for you, if it feels really useful and it doesn't feel like a punishment, then it is a fantastic tool and I would absolutely carry on using it. But if it has ever made you feel like fat loss is miserable and something that you keep failing at, then I want you to walk away from this episode today knowing that there are other options out there. Calories do still matter. Calorie tracking is one way of working with them, but for an awful lot of us, building meals, leaning on protein and fiber, staying a bit more aware of the picking and setting life up so that the better choice is the easier one, that's more than enough for you to see progress without having to log every single calorie. But I do think it's worth having a calorie range to know what it is, even if you're not tracking things, so that you can have that awareness when you're planning your meals to begin with. So even if you're not tracking every single bite, it is a good idea to know what it looks like for you. I'll put a link to my calorie range calculator in the show notes, and that can give you an idea of what a decent deficit would look like and also what maintenance would look like. And then you would know roughly what you can aim for day to day. That's a great approach. When people are coming into the app, I get them to fill out this target setting form and I will set their calories. Me setting their calories doesn't mean that they then have to start tracking everything rigidly, but it's still good to know what they look like. And just one last thing, the aim here is never to get brilliant at dieting. I don't think anybody wants the memory of us to go, oh, they were really, really good at tracking their calories. The aim is to get to a place where it isn't just taking up so much of our headspace, where you eat well most of the time, You have the cake when the cake is incredible, no crap cake, and you just get on with your life. That is the whole idea, making it easier to do the things that you want to do. And if this struck a chord with you today and you'd like a little bit more support putting this into practice, then you know where I am. Come and find me over on Instagram at RuthMacFit, or have a look at the walkthrough of the membership, which I will link in the episode show notes as well. But otherwise, have a lovely day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss the next one. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.